when reflecting back on that game from last year at Allen Fieldhouse, to me, the biggest thing that led to KU's success was passing, right? They were able to outpass the defense of Houston, and that led to them running around and scrambling and allowed KU to get some open looks and take advantage of that. I think that's going to be another very critical aspect of the game again this year, coming up on Saturday, is passing. KU's going to have to be crisp and clean with their passing. They're going to have to be smart with their decision making. And again, that's why I kind of highlighted DeJuan Harris to kick all this whole conversation off, because I think it sort of starts with him, right?
Yeah.
But it really is going to have to be the entire team.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Paid all who enter and beware this podcast. That's right, this is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here, of course, with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. Be sure to check us out on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. Also, if you are following on social media, you can find us at Paid KCSN, at K Flaherty KCSN, at Nick Springer 29 on social media, on Twitter /X. We got some great stuff going on over there. On our YouTube channel, we're close to 500 subscribers, so keep subscribing if you haven't already over there. And of course, anywhere you get your audio podcasts, Spotify, Apple, you can subscribe. Leave a 5-star rating and review, drop a comment, share your thoughts, join the conversation, as well as there are lots of ways to get in contact with us and be a part of the conversation on the show. And by the way, we're going to be talking about this a little bit later on in the show, but Kansas plays Houston coming up on Saturday afternoon /evening. We are planning on having a live postgame show following that game. It's a big matchup, of course, 2 top 10 teams with Houston and Kansas. So we'll be live probably around 8 p.m. Central Time, with the games tipping off at 5:30. We'll be on around 8 on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. So definitely, if you want to get in on some live reactions to that game on Saturday, you'll want to be subscribed and have your notifications turned on, so you'll get notified when we go live to talk about that game afterwards. So we'll be breaking that down a little bit later on in the show. But first, of course, we've got to talk about what transpired last night for Kansas down in Fort Worth against TCU. The Jayhawks get what ended up being a comfortable win, 74-61 over TCU. And lots to take away from this game, Kevin. I do want to kind of start here, though. My biggest initial takeaway was, look, you started pretty slow. You got down 14 on the road. You're thinking, oh, gosh. I mean, a slow start. Like, slow starts has been obviously a theme that you and I have both touched on throughout the course of the season as being like sort of just a killer for this team, right? When they started slow, it's been a struggle for them. They started slow again, got down 14. It was a 26-12, got down 14. Things were not looking great. Battled back to within 2 at the half. And then TCU just kind of sputtered out, and Kansas was able to take control and win, going away comfortably. So I thought, for me at least, that was pretty impressive of, hey, look, even though TCU may not be a great team, like getting down like that on the road and then fighting back to end up winning comfortably, pretty impressive and feels pretty good for KU.
Yeah, when KU's had some struggles this year, and I know we've talked about it on the show, Nick, there have been people have wanted to link this year's team to last year's team and the struggles that last year's team had in different areas. One of the things that I think you and I have said kind of consistently, and it dates back even to the Missouri game, is this year's team seems to have a lot more fight to it, right? Like, they put themselves behind the 8 ball a few times, but you look at the Missouri game, you look at the West Virginia game where they really, were in bad spots, and they were able to battle back. There's a mental fortitude there, and I think that was probably only enhanced by Shaq Moore grabbing a bigger role as he got healthy. Now, one of the things that adding Shaq Moore had also done, Nick, is they had kind of put the bad starts, I don't want to say in the rearview mirror, but they hadn't really been as much of an issue up until last night's game. And I realized, great result, like you said, great to show fight, all of those different things. You hate coming out and having that kind of low energy to start a game for a lot of reasons, but one of them, which, Nick, is just, you do that in March, you could go home. Like, the teams are going to be better than TCU. And so, and I realize, every year since the start of the NCAA tournament, probably fans have said, oh, our teams will know ramp up the focus in the NCAA tournament. So the energy won't be a problem. Generally speaking, the teams that have inconsistencies in effort and focus, that still shows up in March, where you have issues with intensity and focus and energy. And so I think on one hand, like you said, terrific, final 30 minutes of the game, if you will, for KU. I know they got down 14, like you said, but prior to that, at the end of the first 10 minutes, they were down 22-10, so down 12 from that point on. So the final, 3 10-minute periods, they won 64-39. So when you look at that, you're on pace to score over 80 points, over that period. You're on pace to allow, I think, 52 points. So a really strong performance for 3 quarters of the game. You would just like to see that opening 10 minutes, you come out and start off that way and then, show that focus throughout. Because honestly, Nick, I think we'll get into Houston, obviously, but to beat Houston, it's tough to do without a strong 40 minutes. And Kansas hasn't shown a whole lot of, terrific 40-minute efforts to this point. Either there's been the rough start, or in a couple cases, there's been a great start, and then things have, they've kind of held back a little bit, like the Kansas State game, and things have gotten a little hairier from that point on.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're absolutely right about the point on March. I mean, if you play 35 great minutes, but you take 5 minutes off from an energy focus standpoint, that's the difference between, go into the second weekend and packing it up in the round of 32, right?
Yeah.
Or anything like that. So you're absolutely right about that. The other obviously big storyline of this game, Kevin, was second game without KJ Adams, right? Look at Adams again.
Sure.
Bill Self continued to kind of say he seems like he might be week to week. He had said he might be out 3 to 4 games, so that puts him out for probably another week and a half to 2 weeks potentially when you look at KU's schedule. So no KJ Adams again. And look, Flory Bidunga is awesome. That dude is an incredible player. He's so energetic. He's you love to see everything that he does out there. And I think earlier in the season, I think we know you brought up the comparison to him to Ernest Uday a little bit as a freshman. Just this,
with the growth curve. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a really explosive rim running freshman who's got a ton of energy and can really bounce and so on and so forth. And from earlier in the year to now, he is definitely significantly better than Ernest Uday ever was as a freshman. He's clearly even just from over the past 2 months has gotten a lot better, feels a lot more comfortable. What most impresses me, and I think this is where he really differentiates if you were trying to make the comparison to Ernest Uday as a freshman at KU, is the body control. Flory Bidunga, it's really remarkable for a guy of his size and his youth to be able to manipulate his body the way he does and stay under control. And obviously he's a freshman, so he still kind of commits some fouls and so on and so forth, like all freshmen do. But and a phenomenal performance from him. He goes for 10 and 10 in the game for KU, and really, really impressed with what he's done. And again, it was more of the same with him and Hunter Dickinson on the floor at the same time. That helped open things up a lot. So, yeah, I don't think you can say enough about Flory Bidunga. He was far and away the player of the game. There's another guy I know we're going to get into as well that had a nice game, but to me, Flory Bidunga far and away was the guy that jumped out to me as most in this game as, wow, that guy's very, very impressive, and I'm very, very excited to see what he did against TCU and what he can do going forward, because it seems like if he's able to do that, I mean, he also had 4 blocks in the game against TCU as well. So, yeah, really, really impressed with him. And obviously, I've picked him a couple of times as the player to watch for obvious reasons. And it's hard not to watch him, right? I mean, it's hard to take your eyes off of him when he's on the floor. So, really, really impressed with what he's done so far.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, Bill Self said after the game that in the first half, Flory was basically the only player worth the damn. But even after even beyond him playing well in the first half, one of the things that I noticed in the first half, Nick, Flory is a full-fledged member of the Bill Self Circle of Trust TM.
Definitely.
Because he played him some with 2 fouls. And so we've talked about, hey, that's one of the worries and concerns that we have when you're starting these games off with with Flory and Hunter Dickinson. I mean, it's death, taxes, freshman bigs commit fouls. Like it's just one of those things that happens all the time. And so there's a worry that, hey, Flory's going to get into foul trouble because you have him out there at the same time as Hunter Dickinson. Then all of a sudden you're down to, basically 1-5 for an extended period of time. And you'd like Hunter Dickinson to get more rest than he's been able to get too. And so I thought it was interesting that when Flory picked up his second foul, it wasn't an immediate sub. I mean, he brought Hunter in fairly soon after, but Flory was still out there on the court. A lot of guys, even guys that you feel like Bill Self trusts, he didn't necessarily trust them to play with 2 fouls, right? You would go and you would have a seat on the bench for the rest of the half. For Flory to continue to play with 2 fouls really showed, I think, Self's level of trust in Flory this early in his career that, hey, you're not going to pick up an extra foul or two that's really going to put you in a tough spot.
Well, look, it's almost out of necessity. And this is where we touched on this, in the previous show with KJ Adams being out, is that you don't really have a choice almost to a certain extent because, regardless of what you think of KJ Adams as a player, Kansas absolutely needs him, if nothing else, because of the fact that they only have 2 guys essentially that can play the 5 and the 4 right now on their roster with Hunter Dickinson and Flory Bidunga, right? Like those are the only 2 guys. So, we've talked about, you can run the super small lineups and whatnot and do that type of stuff. But at the end of the day, like if you have Flory and Hunter on the floor at the same time, that really, really handcuffs you in terms of what you can do in terms of trying to sub those guys out and keep their minutes down. So even if you think KJ Adams is the worst player of all time, even if you think KJ Adams is does nothing and is not a contributor at all, which obviously that is incorrect if you think that. But the point being, like, beyond all of that, you should still really, really want KJ to be coming back very soon because that's going to really open things up in terms of lineup capabilities again for KU to where you can have Flory on the floor, you can have, Hunter get some more rest and so on and so forth. So that's what I would say. It's like, regardless of what you think of KJ Adams, he's the guy that Kansas desperately needs because they don't have the depth right now. And I think that was maybe part of what we saw in this game against TCU where Flory picks up 2 fouls, but you got to keep him out there because you almost don't even really have a choice, to be honest. And to your point on Hunter, 34 minutes again from Hunter Dickinson, right? Like, I don't think that's sustainable from now until the end of March. If you're thinking about trying to play all the way up until, the last weekend in March and into April. So I continue to be monitoring that. And again, I hope, when KJ Adams does come back, that number can start to get lowered a little bit. Because, look, Hunter Dickinson, talked about it before the K-State game, wanted to challenge him a little bit. He played really great there. Had another really strong game, I thought, against TCU. Ends up with 16 points and 9 rebounds.
But yeah, basically played 35 minutes when you look at the extra minute that he spent, fighting for a rebound with 3 TCU guys.
I was actually exactly going to get into that. We have to talk about that. Just truly one of the most bizarre sequences of events I think I've ever seen in a basketball game where you have 2 guys that just refuse to let go of the ball. And I got to be honest. So they called the double tech, right? What does the rule book say on that? Like, is it just what are they, is it a delay of game? Is it because they won't give up the ball? Like, I was trying to think, like, what's the actual call there? Double techs for being idiots?
Yeah, basically, I think so. But yeah, it's funny too, because you said 2 guys. It was actually like 4, like Hunter Dickinson and 2 TCU guys. And I think that was the weird thing to me, right? Like I've seen in basketball games that I've watched before where 2 guys are fighting for a rebound and they won't let go. And you're like, okay, like let go. Like you proved your point or whatever. But in this case, TCU had dudes like running across the court to also try and take the rebound away. Like it was one of the most absurd things that I've seen. Bill Self was not happy about it after the game. And I think some people were surprised by that because, you think, Bill Self is a guy that values toughness or whatever. But Bill Self also, there's a term in basketball called false hustle. If you're missing your assignment and you're like sprinting to rally back to where, you're you're supposed to be, and you're flying all over the court, but you're not actually doing anything with your movement. It's false hustle. And so I think in that instance, it's one of those things where, yes, I technically get the message that you're trying to send. Bill Self does not like false hustle. He doesn't like false toughness. And so to him, it's like, well, okay, like you're not actually proving you're tough by holding the ball the way that a player, believes that they are. And so I believe Bill Self's actual phrasing was asinine, which I thought it was kind of funny. I thought it was funny that TCU was pumping up the crowd afterwards, despite the fact that TCU did not get the basketball, and despite having 5 guys crawling all over each other to try and get it. And then Nick, KU went on a run.
Yeah, that was the funniest part of the whole sequence to me is they have this comically long sequence of Hunter not letting go of the ball and multiple guys trying to grab it. And then afterwards, you saw the TCU players they're like, "Oh yeah, well, we're forward up." It's like, you didn't even get the ball. Like, you didn't even do anything. Like, you just made yourselves look like idiots for 30 seconds, and then you're trying to pump up the crowd. It's like, yeah. And then, as you said, KU goes on a run after that, right? Like, it was, and these are just the types of things that I think you expect from Hunter Dickinson, right? Like, that's just the type of guy he is. Like, he's just going to be that type of instigator. But yeah, in this case, it was a comical sequence to begin with, just in terms of the absurdity of hanging onto the ball. But then what made it even more hilarious to me was, like you said, the TCU players,
pro wrestling.
Yeah. It was like, what do you guys? You didn't get the ball. What are you doing?
I will say, Nick, though, I tweeted this out last night. If Rose had held on to Jack like that at the end of Titanic, Jack would still be with us.
Yeah. Listen, I got to be honest with you. Titanic, I didn't make it through the movie. It's too long.
He's like, as far as I know, the boat's still up in the water. Like, yeah, around there today,
Yeah, everyone's fine as far as I know. I turned that off. Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, so then KU goes on a run and they end up winning 74-61. There was another player that I feel like we absolutely have to talk about, and we'll be doing that coming up after the break here. Do have to tell you about Home Field Apparel. As always, you can shop Home Field Apparel at homefieldapparel.com, and you can use the promo code PAYHEAT24 for 15% off your first order. It's right there if you're watching on YouTube, or it's right here on my shirt, PAYHEAT. PAYHEAT24 at Home Field Apparel, 15% off, homefieldapparel.com. You can shop plenty of other schools as well. If you got a friend, family member, somebody else who's a fan of a different school, and you're feeling generous. Obviously the holidays have come and gone, but you can, listen, we need to normalize gift giving any time of the year, not just during the holidays, anytime. So you know what? You got a friend, you got somebody, get them a Home Field Apparel shirt and use that promo code PAYHEAT24. More Kansas basketball talk is coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. We're here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. Member FDIC. As always, if you like what you're hearing, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe, drop a like, drop a comment on the audio platforms, Spotify, Apple, and our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. You can drop a comment. We got plenty of comments, people sharing their thoughts. You can join in on the conversation there as well. All things KU. Also, so we spent some time there, Kevin, talking about the absence of KJ Adams and kind of how that helped Flory Bidunga step into a significant role, and Hunter Dickinson as well. The other, obviously, aspect of KJ Adams not being out there for Kansas while he deals with injury is that really kind of opens up a void at the wing slot, at that 3-4 spot, for some guys that have struggled a little bit this year to step up. And of course, namely, I'm speaking about one AJ Storr, who had I don't know. How would you assess his game against TCU, Kevin? There was some good moments. There were some really good moments. There was a couple bad moments, but overall, I think you have to come out of it feeling positively about what he did in the game. I would think.
Is it Giannis, the god that's got like the two faces or whatever?
Oh, I had $10. Now you're trying to tell me?
Yeah, that's my fault. So Two-Face in the movie Batman, I think that when you look at it, the first half was brutal, Nick. Like it really was. You know, he played 7 minutes. I think he was a minus 13 in those 7 minutes, which was far and away the worst for KU in that first half. And so I think with how well he played in the second half, and let's come right out and say it, Nick, he was great in the second half. He was terrific in the second half. Because of that, I think we ignore the first half, and there are going to be some people, and I think I maybe even saw some posts or tweets or whatever where people were talking about, oh, he was allowed to play through his mistakes, and that's why he found success. When you're a minus 13 in 7 minutes, like you don't necessarily deserve to keep getting those chances. In this game, though, Kansas really needed AJ Storr in that second half. And when you look at it, you know, credit to him, credit to Bill Self for continuing to put him on the court. I know a lot of people are kind of up in arms with that relationship. It's very Remy like, I feel like, where everybody was very angry at Bill Self, you know, even when it was apparent that Remy was blowing defensive assignments all over the place, blowing some play assignments. Yeah, people forget this now because they won a national title, Nick. They lost the Dayton game basically because Remy ruined like the final offensive play because he went the wrong place. But everybody forgot because it all got fixed. And that's a really long way to say if AJ Storr can be the guy that he was in the second half, people are going to forget who he was in the first half. And he needs to be that guy in the second half consistently, though. And I think that's what Bill Self has been trying to get. Because AJ Storr in the second half, yeah, he scored Nick, but he played with more energy. He got steals. He did those different things. And we bring up the Duke game, I feel like, quite a bit on this show. He scored 11 points, I think, against Duke. But if you remember, he had several good defensive possessions. I think he had a steal or tie-up, you know, in there as well. That's going to be the thing that tells the tale in terms of whether or not AJ Storr is playable, because he's going to have stretches where he scores the ball. He's a good scorer, but he needs to do the other stuff. And especially with KJ Adams out and Flory potentially in foul trouble, he needs to do the other stuff. When we watch AJ Storr against Houston on Saturday, with the way Houston crashes the offensive boards, AJ can't be a guy that watches the ball go up on the rim. He has to be not just an active rebounder, Nick, but an active guy who blocks out people to go get the rebound. And so that's sort of the tug of war here. Is it's not like Bill Self watches AJ Storr in practice and says, oh, that guy can't help us. And the reason that you know that is AJ Storr continues to see the court even after he'll have a really awful game, and then he's out there on the court the next game. And his playing time kind of waxes and wanes with how well he's playing and how well he's doing the little things. But in order for KU to have success with AJ Storr, he needs to do more than score. He needs to impact the game in other ways. And he needs to make sure, too, when he is trying to score, he's taking the right kinds of shots and offensive opportunities, too. And so second half, terrific. The issue with AJ has been consistency. And so now you really want to see him carry that over for an entire game, because as good as he was in the first half or in the second half, you know, he still wound up with a minus plus minus. And
Really? Yeah.
And like, plus minus isn't everything. I'm not trying to say that at all. I'm just saying he really struggled in that first half, and he needs to eliminate those kinds of halves if he's going to help KU get to where KU wants to get.
Yeah, I mean, look, Kansas is 2-0 right now in games without KJ Adams, but it was against K-State and TCU. And we're going to talk about Houston here in a little bit. That's going to be a whole different beast. And AJ Storr, to your point, is going to be a pretty critical piece of that puzzle for Kansas in the game against Houston, I think. And And yeah, I mean, look, in this game against TCU, you're right. He has 3 steals, which actually led the team, had a couple run out dunks, but then also had a sequence where he missed a wide open 3 and then failed to get a 50-50 ball that led to a dunk at the other end for TCU, right? Like that was a sequence that also happened as well in the game for him. And he had some up and down moments. He, kind of had I think a boneheaded foul at one point, but then, later on, again, gets another steal and so on and so forth. So yeah, just really up and down from him. And I think overall I'm coming away from it with sort of the glass half full perspective of,
Sure.
Okay, yes, you had a bad first half, but you ended the game pretty strong. You finished with 12 points. You got some rebounds. You showed some effort and hustle on defense and made some plays. Like that's what you want to look at. That's what you want to kind of take away from it. So, and look, I think we've touched on this. Kansas very clearly has their top 2 scorers on offense. It's Zeke Mayo and Hunter Dickinson. Those are the 2 guys. Like those are your 2 options scoring wise. You'd love to have a third option.
Yeah.
whether that's AJ Storr or Rylan Griffin, those are the top 2 candidates really for it. You'd love to have one of those guys, step into that role. And another moment in the game I thought from AJ Storr is there were a couple moments, Kevin, where it felt like he was doing the right thing, just maybe not like, for instance, he drove at one point and had a great kick out pass to Rylan Griffin. It was just a low pass, and Griffin had to sort of catch it low before, right? Like if that's a cleaner pass, maybe he's able to hit that 3.
Yeah.
So there's just little things like that I think you hope you can see him, come away from that positively and move forward.
I'm going glass half full as well. I think that even just showing the ability to bounce back like that is a good thing, where you're not just bouncing back from a bad game, right? You're bouncing back from a bad start in the game you're playing in. And even beyond that, like I said, like it would be easy if AJ Storr just went in, threw in a bunch of buckets, had 15 or whatever. But to your point, and I think it's a point that's well made, is, he was doing the right things outside of just scoring the basketball too. Like that version of AJ Storr. And I think that's what all of us are going to be watching for through February, right? Is how often do we get that version of AJ Storr? And if it's something that he starts to show consistently where, hey, this is who I am now, then KU's going to be really dangerous and a really tough out, Nick.
Couple of the notes from this game against TCU. One of the big concerns for me was second chance points. Kansas really struggled on the offensive glass against TCU. They got a lot of second chance opportunities. Look, TCU, unfortunately, like if you're a TCU fan, listen to me listen at all. I don't know why you would be, but if you are, I am sorry. Like TCU is terrible on offense. They are awful. I mean, the rim got absolutely abused by TCU. It was terrible.
And it went in the first half. That thing, I don't know who set that rim up, like in terms of how tight they did or did not make that, but it felt like in the first half, TCU got about 5 buckets where somebody just kind of threw the ball off the rim and it bounced around an extremely soft rim and helped them out.
Yeah. Yeah, TCU's offense it's tough. They were really not very good. They were pretty bad from 3, 5 of 24 for the game. They were bad from the free throw line. They've been bad from the free throw line all season long. Like really, the 2 things that they did well against Kansas was they offense rebounded very well, and Kansas ends up with 5 more turnovers than TCU as well in the game. Also, that kind of helped them out. One thing I did kind of want to ask you about, Kevin, or just kind of opine on for a second is, for as often as Kansas wants to get the ball to Hunter Dickinson in the post, I am constantly surprised or taken aback by how many, usually at least it's minimum like twice a game, you just see an entry pass that just goes straight to the defense.
Yeah.
Like I don't really know whose fault that is. I don't know if you can offer any insight on that. Like, is Hunter Dickinson not doing a good enough job like setting up, or is it just bad? Because like there was literally one play where Shaq Moore he dribbled down the court and within 5 seconds of the shot clock threw it straight to the defender who was fronting Hunter Dickinson. And I was like, what was that pass? Like what?
Yeah.
I don't know. You got any insight on that?
I think it's a little bit of everything, right? Like I think you've got some guys that are not great post-entry passers. It feels like Shaq turned the ball over a game or two ago where he just didn't clear the guy in front of him too. Like he was trying to throw an entry pass, and the guy who was defending Shaq, who sort of reached up and was like, yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. And so you have some guys who aren't great entry guys, but there are some times where either, Hunter doesn't have like a full on, position where he's screening the guy off and somebody's able to go around him. I think too, Hunter's not the most quick twitch of athletes. And so if he has to move off of a spot to go gather the ball, there's a chance that somebody goes and collects that thing. And so I think there are a few factors at play, but I will say, changing the topic real quick, Shaq Moore making 3-3-pointers is a nice development. I know he's had times in his career, he is kind of a streaky guy at times. He's made 4 threes in his career, I think twice. One of them I know was last year. He was like 4 for 4 in an SEC game. And by the end of the year last year, I think in SEC play, he shot like 35%. And he averaged a made 3 a game, but like 4 of those were in one game. So there were peaks and valleys in there, but ultimately, if you're KU, you'd take Shaq Moore shooting 35% from 3 at some point. The other thing too, Shaq Moore, that was a positive development. A negative development, this is the second pretty bad game in the last 3 or so from DeJuan Harris. And DeJuan Harris, I will defend that guy. I am a DeJuan Harris stan. I've said before, when you take DeJuan Harris off the court, a lot of times you maybe most see his value then, because all of a sudden KU won't be getting any good looks. They'll be turning the ball over. And it's just like, man, the steadying hand of a point guard out here is really important. But he had, I think, was it 3 turnovers against somebody fairly recent. And then in this one last night, he had 5. He didn't shoot the ball well last night. And Nick also, he was struggling defensively last night at times. And so it was funny. Somebody was saying, well, this is the DeJuan Harris we're used to. No, it's not. But let's just get that out of the way. Whether you like DeJuan Harris or not, DeJuan Harris typically takes pretty good care of the ball this year. He's done a good job of that statistically. Whether you like DeJuan Harris or not, he's usually a pretty good defender. He doesn't usually get, have those issues. KU basically people forget about this. They basically made the Final Four and ran away from Miami in 2022 because he absolutely put a cooler on Cam McGusty, who was making everything. And as much as people give Remy Martin credit in the second half against North Carolina, a lot of people don't realize when Remy came in and when DeJuan went out, KU was already up 3. And when DeJuan came back in, KU was still up 3. Now, Remy made some really big plays to keep it there, but DeJuan Harris's defense to that point against North Carolina in that second half was a huge part of the reason that KU won a national title. And so I'm not entirely sure, with DeJuan, you tend to think he'll bounce back. He was really good against K-State, had 15 points, scored the ball well, was good passing, defended pretty well. So it's not even like it's hey, he stunk the last several games, but 2 out of the last 3, you're kind of hoping that he tightens things up to what we're kind of used to seeing from him.
Yeah, I wanted to use DeJuan Harris, and I'm glad you spent some time speaking on him, because I wanted to use DeJuan Harris as a segue into this game against Houston.
Yes.
Because it starts with DeJuan Harris when it comes to turnovers for Kansas. It's 17 of them against TCU. And that, to me, is really where this Houston game is most alarming. I mean, there's lots of things that are alarming about Houston. They're a very, very good team. But most alarming, Kevin, is Houston is top 10 in the country in forcing turnovers on defense, and they're also top 12 in the country in not turning over on offense. So this is a team that is going to try to turn you over a lot and can turn you over a lot. They've proven that, and they also don't give it away a lot offensively. So I think with DeJuan Harris specifically, and really just KU as a whole, but obviously DeJuan being the point guard and handling the ball a lot, like taking care of the ball against this Houston team is going to be absolutely critical, right? Like I think if DeJuan Harris, like I'll put it this way, DeJuan Harris could have a good game and KU still could lose. If DeJuan Harris has a bad game, I think KU definitely loses.
Yes.
I don't think there's any chance they win if DeJuan Harris has a bad game. If he's turning it over, 3, 4, 5 times or more, I don't think there's any chance KU can win. He can have a good game and they could still lose. But if he has a bad game, I think it's a definite loss for KU in this one against Houston, just because of how important that is and how significant of it is that Houston forces all those turnovers. I mean, because on top of just, forcing a lot of turnovers, you go down the list. This Houston team is phenomenal on defense. Number 1 in the country in block percentage. Number 1 in the country in effective field goal percentage. Number 1 in the country in 2-point percentage. They're top 30 in 3-point defense. They're top 15 in steal percentage. They're top 15 and even just not even forcing turnovers, or not even forcing steals, just getting turnovers, period, right? Like, this is a very scary defense. They're number 1 in the country in KenPom as well. And look, they're coming off of their best defensive game of the season as well against Utah. I was checking in on that Utah score periodically throughout the night, and at one point it was like 50-20, right? And I was like, man, 50-20, that's not great. If it's halftime, like they've only scored 20 points at the half. Kevin, it was 50-20 with like 7 minutes left in the game. They had 20 points like in 30 minutes of basketball almost. It was unbelievable what they did, or what Houston did against Utah. And look, they did the same thing against West Virginia. Had West Virginia 54 points. They shut down K-State. They only allowed 46 to TCU when they played earlier in the year. They annihilated BYU. Oklahoma State only gave up 47 points. They've only given up more than 70 points, I think, like 3 times all season, which most noteworthy. It's the times they've given up more than 70 points, they've lost. So that's something else to keep in mind. But yeah, 70-36, they get the win over Utah. They did narrowly escape UCF in Orlando, which obviously that was a game that KU annihilated UCF. So I don't want to make it seem like Houston is absolutely unbeatable. And obviously this is a Houston team that, under similar circumstances, rolled into Allen Fieldhouse last year, and Kansas really just kind of thumped them, right? So that's possible too. This should be a Houston team with some familiar faces. If you follow, the Big 12 or college basketball, they still have LJ Cryer, Jawan Roberts, Emmanuel Sharp had a really good game for Houston against KU in Houston last year. Malik Wilson's another one. They did add Milos Uzan, who again is a guy that shouldn't be a familiar name because of the fact that he was at Oklahoma previously before going to Houston. So this is still a loaded team. They've got incredible length and incredible depth as well. The one thing is, like, they don't really have a true, like, 5-man, so to speak, like a true 7-footer type player. So maybe this is a game where Hunter Dickinson has a chance to have some success with his size, but I would expect that Houston's going to be flying around trying to shut him down as well. I don't know. Where do you sit on this one if you're KU, Kevin, with Houston coming into Lawrence coming up on Saturday?
Yeah, by the way, Kelvin Sampson had one of the better quotes of the year when he was talking about Milos after their game last night. Not exactly a compliment to Oklahoma, where he said, Milos was softer than parquet margarine in the microwave when he got here. He learned to get tougher. So not exactly shouting out Porter Mosier right there for toughening.
Which, hey, Oklahoma's actually been pretty decent this year, though. So
they've been all right. They've had more struggles in SEC play. Well, once that's tipped off. But no, overall, Nick, the reason that the UCF game was what it was Houston this year actually shoots the three at a pretty high percentage. They don't take a ton of them, but when they do, they've got good shooters. LJ Cryer, Emmanuel Sharp, Milos is a pretty solid shooter as well. And so against UCF, they just did not make outside shots. The other thing is, for those of you who haven't watched Houston very much, Houston runs kind of this big to big double, where they force a lot of turnovers. Basically, they want to force you to speed up offensively. And so when you dump the ball down to Hunter Dickinson, that guy is getting to Hunter Dickinson in a hurry to try and turn him over. The good news is if you can pass out of that, then you can force them into some scramble drills and things like that where you can get some shots. The other part of it, Nick, and where UCF kind of hung around in that one, is because of those doubles, because they asked those guys to be so mobile and everything, you can get Houston on the offensive glass. Houston is going to get you on the offensive glass because they basically recruit their 4 and their 5 man. And I think their recruiting pitch is just basically, we will never, ever throw you the ball. But what we will do is we'll allow you to go after every possible offensive rebound. And so Houston, every single year, is among the best teams in the country on the offensive glass. This year, I think they're 12th in offensive rebounding rate. But you can get them on the other end because of the movement, because of the way that they play. And so I think that that's going to be a key, too, is not turning the ball over, getting extra possessions for yourself on the offensive glass. To your point, Tugler's the number 1 shot blocker in the entire country right now. He's got a shot block rate that's significantly better than Anthony Davis's was, like back in the day. Like he swats everything, but he's 6'8". Like, to your point, like, is this a game where an aggressive Hunter Dickinson can post him under the basket and potentially get some looks where Tugler's not bothering him? Because Tugler is a terrific athlete. He gets off the floor quickly with great timing. But, is Hunter's size something that really helps you out there? I think, and this is off the top of my head, Nick, didn't Hunter play pretty well against Houston in their first game last year?
At Allen Fieldhouse, I believe. Yes. Well, it was really, remember, it was Kevin McCullough who had a really nice game for KU last year at Allen Fieldhouse that really helped them get that win.
He had a pretty good game, but yeah, Hunter had a 28 with 4 assists. And I think the passing part of it, and KJ Adams last year had 7 assists. So that big double, your post guys have to pass the ball well. And I think that's going to be one of the interesting things to watch, not just with Dickinson, who I do think, sees the floor well, can make some passes, can also occasionally make the sloppy pass when he's trying to do a little too much. But the other part of that, Nick, is Flory is not a great passer at this point. That's not one of his strengths. And so are you putting him in a position where, he's going to be in a spot to turn the ball over too? You're going to have to be really, really sharp in the way you take care of the ball as a team. And we saw Kansas against another team that turns people over like crazy in Iowa State. And Kansas turned the ball over quite a bit at a pretty high percentage. You really want to show in this one that you can take care of it. They do a pretty good job of making sure that you don't get great 3-point looks as well. And that's notable because you aren't getting easy shots at the rim either. And so in the outside shots that Kansas does get, they really need to knock down. And I think, again, Johnny Furphy made 3 or 4 last year. If KU can get, 3 or 4 threes from Zeke Mayo, if they can have a game from Rylan Griffin where he makes a couple, that's going to go a long way toward helping KU in this one too.
Yeah, look, I think you hit the nail right on the head when talking about passing, because when reflecting back on that game from last year at Allen Fieldhouse, to me, the biggest thing that led to KU's success was passing, right? They were able to outpass the defense of Houston, and that led to them running around and scrambling and allowed KU to get some open looks and take advantage of that. I think that's going to be another very critical aspect of the game again this year, coming up on Saturday, is passing. KU's going to have to be crisp and clean with their passing. They're going to have to be smart with their decision-making. And again, that's why I kind of highlighted DeJuan Harris to kick all this whole conversation off, because I think it sort of starts with him, right?
Yeah.
But it really is going to have to be the entire team, because the difference, I think, when you look at the Iowa State game that KU played in Ames, was Iowa State was somewhat sloppy too, and they turned the ball over also.
Yes.
I don't really know that you can just expect that to be the case for Houston. Like, Houston is going to take care of the ball a little bit more, I think, probably. And so you can't afford, if you're KU, to give it away in the way that we've seen KU do in recent games, right? I mean, like I said, against a team that's as offensively challenged as TCU, you can get away with 17 turnovers and be fine, obviously, and win by 13. That ain't gonna fly. That ain't gonna fly against Houston. So that's gonna be the big number to watch, I think, against this Houston team, because they are very, very good. They are also very strong on the offensive end, like you highlighted, Kevin. So it's going to be a tough matchup for KU in this game against Houston. And look, I've mentioned it before. You look at KU's schedule coming up here. They are going to have 3 of these next 4 games are against Houston, Baylor, and Iowa State. I think you need to go 2-1 in those, right? And Houston arguably is the most challenging of those 3. even though Houston and Iowa State are at home, like, this game's probably the most challenging, even when you look at going to Baylor. So you would really, really like to get this one if you're KU. So let's get into some game predictions here, Kevin. How do you expect this game to unfold? Allen Fieldhouse, 5:30 Saturday afternoon. How do you expect this one to play out?
Yeah, to your point about Houston and Utah, Utah scored its 24th point, I think, at like the 7.5 minute mark of the game. And so I expect Kansas to have a little more success offensively than Utah, but it's also instructive, I think, to look at that game and just sort of how Houston bulldozed them. Houston got 17 more field goal attempts, Nick, because of offensive rebounds, because of differences in turnovers. They also got 7 more free throw attempts. And so that's the thing that you have to really avoid if you're Kansas. You can't have Houston with so many more shot attempts because you're turning the ball over, they're not turning the ball over, and they're beating you on the offensive glass to create extra possessions and extra shots as well. And so I do think Kansas is equipped to attack on the offensive glass, especially if they wind up having some of those lineups with like Flory and Hunter out there. I think that that's an area where they could find success. I'm interested to see what KU does from a cutting standpoint, right? Because I think that one of the reasons that Kevin McCullough did fairly well was Kevin McCullough was an outstanding cutter off the ball. And if you look at when Hunter is out there, he gets the ball, the blitz is coming, that double team, who's going to make the cut to the basket that really works? Because when you're playing 3 guards together, there's not really a great answer necessarily for a guy that's going to cut and then finish in traffic or whatever. It would also help KU, and you know, we say this game after game after game, it would help KU to get to the free throw line more than they have been. Houston doesn't foul a ton. They're not necessarily like great at it, but at the same time, like they're pretty good at not fouling. But points are going to be at such a premium in this one that getting the ability to do that. And also the other part, Nick, is if you can get a guy like Tugler into foul trouble, if you can find a way to put him on the bench, I think the calculus does change a little bit. I do like KU to win this game at home. I do think Houston's a really tough matchup for KU, especially if they're making outside shots. And again, against UCF, they didn't. That's why UCF almost won that game. But the other thing is Houston doesn't take – it's not like you remember the beginning of the K-State game where K-State took about 35 threes to start off.
Yeah.
Houston doesn't really play that way. They're more a team that it's like, hey, we're going to hit you and we're going to make 6 threes, but it's going to be on 13 attempts type of deal. But I do think KU is going to be hyper-focused for this one. Big 12 titles probably on the line in this one. And I'm not saying if you win it, even that you're going to win the title, but you have to pull a game back because it's so brutal to win at Houston. And so you really have to split those games. I think Kansas is going to show up really well. I think they wind up winning this one in just sort of an absolute like slugfest. I'll say KU wins this game 65-63. It's probably not going to be very pretty. Ken Palm actually predicts Houston to win this one by a point. So I I guess we always pick a player of the game.
Yeah. Give me a play.
To say the player to watch in this one is Hunter Dickinson, because I think, one, the matchup in the post that you talked about where he's going to have such a size advantage with Houston not having a true five. I think his passing is going to be key, either positively or negatively. And he's going to have to rebound at a really high rate. You want him to help you on the offensive glass, but Nick, he's got to grab defensive rebounds in this one. And he's usually pretty good at it, but you can't have a time period like you saw against TCU where guys aren't blocking people out, and so you're giving up offensive rebounds in this one. So Hunter's going to have to pull down some contested boards in this one as well. And so I like Hunter Dickinson in this one. I like Hunter Dickinson to have, over 20 points, and I think it's going to be a double-double as well, maybe like a 21 and 12 or something like that.
My player to watch is I have similar reasons, but I'm going with DeJuan Harris. I mentioned it earlier. I kind of gave it away earlier, actually, when I was talking about him. But DeJuan Harris, as we said, has kind of had a bumpy game the past couple of games, a handful of games he's had, 5 turnovers against TCU. Like, I think it starts and ends with him when it comes to setting the tone in terms of taking care of the ball and not turning it over. Like, I think he's going to be sort of the one to keep an eye on when it comes to that. And his ability to pass, his ability to create, his ability to take care of the ball, it has to start with him. He has to be the one taking care of it the most, because he's going to have the ball in his hands the most, more than likely, right? So I like DeJuan Harris as sort of a player to watch because, again, I think I mentioned earlier, like, I firmly believe that if DeJuan Harris has a bad game, KU will not win. He could have a good game and they still could lose, but if he has a bad game, I don't really know that they win unless like Zeke or Hunter just goes absolutely nuclear or something. But so I think it actually does start with DeJuan Harris having a solid game just in terms of taking care of the ball and setting the tone offensively. I am gonna go with Kansas also. This just to me feels like a game where the lights are the brightest. It's at Allen Fieldhouse. I just get the sense that Kansas is going to turn up for this one. I think they're going to do it. They've done it in the past. Big games like this, they just find ways to show up for it. I also think it's probably going to be a bit more low scoring. I'm going to go. I do think Kansas is going to have to score 70 though. So I'm going to go 71-66. I think Kansas will get the win. I will also just throw this tidbit in there as well. Kansas is 2-0 without KJ Adams. That was against K-State and TCU. This is an entirely different ball game with Houston. So This will really, really kind of really either highlight, the issues. If it's a loss for Kansas, it will sort of probably further highlight some of the things that KU's missing with KJ Adams not out there. Or if it's a win, it'll be, okay, now we're talking, right? Like now we have some guys that have stepped up, like AJ Storr probably is going to have a nice game if that happens, and then you can bring KJ back into the fold as well. So, I would just say for anybody who is overreacting and saying, "Oh, look, Kansas is 2-0 without KJ Adams," pump the brakes on that. Number one, because it's been against the school of the blind and TCU when it came to shooting, and the school of the poor when it came to K-State. Because I don't know, because screw K-State. But the point being, 2 really bad teams. Now you're playing against the big boys here. Against Houston. This will determine a little bit more of that. But I do think Kansas will find a way to get it done. Like I said, this to me just has the vibes of the type of game where they're going to get up for it and it'll be 4 minutes of high intensity basketball. I hope even if KU loses, I hope that they still show up for it just so that it's a really exciting competitive game, because I think you're talking about a Houston team that you would probably agree, Kevin, is certainly a national title contender, a Final Four contender. And then obviously Kansas.
The way that they get extra possessions and extra shots actually is very reminiscent of the 2017 North Carolina team that won it all, because that team just got 80 billion more shots than Oregon in the Final Four and Gonzaga in the national title game. And I think Houston wins in a very similar manner. But doesn't this game, do you, Nick, kind of feel just like a classic Bill Self team at Allen Fieldhouse in a big game type of game where it's like it doesn't matter how it gets done, but it's probably going to find a way to get done?
Yes, that's exactly right. It really does just feel like big game, Allen Fieldhouse, Saturday afternoon, what college basketball is all about, and it Kansas just wins those games. It's just really what it comes down to. They win those games. And so we'll see how it plays out. Certainly, I'm very excited for it. As I teased earlier in the show, we are planning to have a immediate live post-game show following the KU Houston game on Saturday night. So after the game, you come hang out with us and react to the game with us as it regards to KU and Houston. 5:30 tip, so we'll probably be going live on our YouTube channel probably around 8-ish, probably within 15, 20 minutes of the final buzzer in that game. So you can subscribe on YouTube at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, so you'll be alerted when we go live after the game. You can hop in. We had some great interactions in our chat when we went live after the Iowa State game with other KU fans, so you can come in, join the conversation with them, join the conversation with us as we break down everything that happens in the game right afterwards. So once again, be sure to check us out on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN and subscribe and come join us on Saturday night after the KU Houston game. Really looking forward to that one. So, Kevin, you got any final thoughts here before we wrap things up?
No, I think this is going to be a really fun game, and it's one of those that while it's at Allen Fieldhouse, you still want to show you have the ability to beat, a top tier team. Obviously, this would be their first quote unquote top tier win since what, Duke probably
for Kansas.
Yeah, for Kansas. And so if you win this one, you really feel like you're tracking in the right direction, even though obviously NCAA tournament games, unfortunately, not played at Allen Fieldhouse. But I still think that there's a lot you can learn from yourself in a game like that. And we'll kind of see, hey, is this where this KU team's A game is at, that they can take out a team as good as Houston when they're playing as well as they can? And if the answer to that is affirmative, then you're feeling like this is a team really trending in the right direction heading into February.
Which, by the way, Duke is now the number one team in KenPom, and Kansas beat them on a neutral court. So
with Hunter Dickinson missing the final 10 minutes. But who's counting? Nobody's looking at that. Nobody's considering that.
Yeah. So, all right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Paid Podcast. Once again, join us on Saturday night after the KU Houston game for a live edition of our show on our YouTube channel. And if you're listening on the audio afterwards, you can always join in the conversation as well there. You can join us on social media, interact with us there. K Flaherty, KCSN. Nick Springer 29 at Paid KCSN for our Pay Heat account. Plenty of ways to join the conversation. We look forward to chatting with you again on Saturday night after the KU Houston game. Until then, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.